What's up, everybody? Cody Shirk here, and I'm going to talk to you about Mongolia because it's a country that no one ever mentions when you think of geopolitics or investing. And I don't think I've ever heard anybody talk about Mongolia recently and how it's an incredible investing opportunity, except for me. I'm also going to bring up the United States, Russia, China, coal, oil, and natural gas, and how they all relate to each other. And I'm also going to share 3 investment opportunities that look very interesting right now. And I don't think anybody's really looking at these opportunities because they're in Mongolia. So let's talk about Mongolia first. It's a country located between China and Russia. We all know the historical context of Mongolia and the Mongols, and this general area of the world being, let's say, having flexible borders. It hasn't been super flexible over the past century, but there have been power struggles between Russia, between the Soviets, Mongolia, and China for centuries, for thousands of years. And so this area of the world is just primed for conflict because there's different resources in different areas of Asia that need to be transported through Mongolia. And Mongolia is got a double-edged sword. On one hand, they're primed for a lot of conflict, but on another hand, they can leverage their position to better themselves because people have to physically transport goods through Mongolia. The country is actually pretty big. It's twice the size of Texas. It's about the size of Kazakhstan, which is right to the west, but the population is tiny. There's a little over 3 million people in Mongolia, and half of those people live in the capital, Ulaanbaatar. So the majority of Mongolia, as far as the land, is empty. In fact, it's the least populated country in the world, which means you could roam around that country for days and probably not see anybody. Now, this means that the country's beautiful. There's a lot of unspoiled nature, but it also means that they're held back economically. There's not a lot of human capital there. So as a country today in 2024, it struggles to rank with other countries that have huge populations. However, it's very resource rich, and that's where this situation with Russia and China is getting interesting. So Russia, to the north of Mongolia, produces a lot of oil and gas, and because of the Ukraine war, Russia has shifted away exports of oil and gas into Europe towards China. Mongolia is conveniently located between China and Russia. Convenient for the Mongolians, not convenient for the Russians or Chinese. So Russia has to, or will eventually have to, transport a lot of its petroleum and gas through Mongolia. And that's a big pain in the butt for the Russians. They would rather just transport directly to China. And for China, China's to the south of Mongolia, and Mongolia exports 90% of its product to China. So Mongolia is really dependent on China economically, and China gets a lot of coal from Mongolia. China produces of all the electricity produced in China, 60% of it comes from coal power plants. 50% of that coal comes from Indonesia and Australia and a couple other countries, but Mongolia exports coking coal, which is used in steel processing in China. So the coal coming from Mongolia into China is very important to China, and China relies on Mongolia for a lot of raw resources, tin, copper, and gold as well. So you have these 3 countries, again, always flexible on the relationships, but always going to be next to each other, so they have to be somewhat friendly or somewhat make some sort of deal. Now, the United States, which is more or less an adversary to China and Russia, views Mongolia as a location for possible influence. So the US is very motivated to have Mongolia on the US western side when it comes to economic policy and political relationships. So the US is currently going into Mongolia and trying to push for stronger relationships. In fact, a couple weeks ago, the US announced that they'll be breaking ground on a brand new embassy. And while that may not cost a lot, it's a very symbolic move for the US to say, hey, we're going to build this new state-of-the-art massive embassy because we want a strong relationship with you, Mongolia. We want to be friends long into the future. And Mongolia knows that. Mongolia is trying to play the card of I'm friends with you, Russia, I'm friends with you, China, and I'm trying to be friends with you, US, which is a really tough line to walk. I do not envy their position when it comes to the relationship balance there. But the US is very motivated to get the Mongolian government to align with US vision, because Mongolia could potentially interrupt the flow of energy from Russia into China. It could also possibly interrupt the exports of coal into China. But the US has to get the Mongolian economy to diversify so the Mongolians aren't so reliant on exporting to China. And that's what the US is currently doing. The US is trying to get the resources, especially the rare earth metals that exist in Mongolia, developed and exported in order to diversify the economy of Mongolia away from coal. And that's currently going on right now, and that's the story you should be watching. It's a longer term story. It's going to take years to unfold, but it's something that is actually happening right now. Another big story that you should be aware of is that Russia is trying to build a pipeline through Mongolia to transport gas into China, as I mentioned before. This pipeline is called PS2, which is Power of Siberia 2. It's a second pipeline they're trying to build. And the Mongolians are pushing back. So Putin was in Mongolia about 2 weeks ago trying to broker this deal as well as push other initiatives. And the Mongolian government announced after Putin's departure that they had no plans to build any type of pipeline until at least 2028. They released this 4-year project list, and the pipeline was nowhere to be seen on there. So the Mongolians are not committing to building this pipeline, which is obviously not good for the Russians or the Chinese. Who knows what's going on behind the closed doors. The US may have been a big player in there to prevent the Mongolians from getting this pipeline developed across its territory. All right, let's jump into the investment opportunities because I said there was 3 of them. The first one is Erdene. Erdene is a gold miner. I believe it's a Canadian company that's operating in Mongolia. Their stock is up like 100% in the past year. I mean, gold prices are hitting new all-time highs literally like every day. So there's huge opportunity for this company to continue to go up, but it has already gone up about 100% in the past year. Another company is Mongolia Growth Group, and this company actually has nothing to do with coal, nothing to do with gold or any resource. They're actually investing in real estate in Ulaanbaatar. I like this thesis that they have. Their thesis is basically Russia and China need a relationship, a strong relationship, and with Mongolia being in the middle, it's inevitable that trade is going to go through Mongolia and the capital Ulaanbaatar. So real estate is going to increase in value, and there's going to be more and more in development. So this company, Mongolia Growth Group, is publicly listed. You can invest in it, and it has a PE of 6, super cheap. And it's not a resource company, so it's not really like stuck to the price of gold or copper or whatnot. There's a potential for growth, significant growth, if they are able to manage their real estate portfolio effectively. The third company is Mongolia Mining Corp. It's the largest producer and exporter of coal, and as I mentioned before, 50% of the exports that Mongolia ships to China is coal. And this company specifically, Mongolia Mining Corp, has a PE of 5, super cheap, and China's consumption of coal is not decreasing. People think coal is going extinct. It's not. In fact, China's consumption of coal increased 4% from 2023 to 2024. So who knows how long coal will last in the world, especially as it pertains to the Mongolia-China relationship, but at least for the next several years. And this company has a PE of 5, so it's very likely that this company is going to continue to do business profitably for quite some time. All right, I'm going to wrap up that geopolitical story because you can see that Mongolia is playing a central role between China and Russia, and the US, of course, trying to push influence there. But I want to mention one more thing because it has to do with me being in Texas last week. I spoke to many high net worth individuals. A lot of these people had real estate investments throughout the US. They're very wealthy Texans, and they are almost exclusively allocated to real estate in the United States. And these people were very wealthy, so I can't fault them too much. I mean, investing in the US has been a great opportunity over the past, well, almost century, and these people have exploited the opportunity perfectly. However, with real estate prices being sky high right now, the equity markets in the US being sky high right now, there's a huge opportunity to rotate out of some of those assets and identify some cheap assets to go into. And the story I just told you about with Mongolia is something that's very interesting. I didn't specifically talk about Mongolia while I was in Texas. In fact, I talked about lithium, I talked about Chile, I talked about Argentina, I talked about platinum, I talked about all kinds of other resources that look interesting right now compared to the US markets. And for these investors who want to see continued growth, it's an interesting idea for them to rotate out of the assets they hold into these cheap assets. Now, I've been working with private investors, private funds, and also some foreign governments to help them identify certain trends that they can get into. And as the world as the world changes more and more, as political relationships change, as trade routes change, over the next 5 to 10 years, there's going to be some obscene opportunities. I say obscene in the good way. There's going to be some incredible opportunities for people who understand this bigger picture, for people who understand where things are going. And if you can identify where things are going a couple of years from now, you can position yourself right now for huge, huge profits in the next couple of years. So if you've got some ideas or questions, reach out to me. I'm always open to hear about interesting opportunities, and I always like to talk to smart people doing incredible things. All right, I'm gonna finish my walk through the Florida swamp here, maybe find some animals, and I'll see you later. Bye.